Hey everyone, it's Louisa from Feel Good Astrology. This is, I'm not sure which lesson this is. Might be 7, might be 8. I think it's 7 off the top of my head. But it's about aspects and how we can look at the relationship between planets in your chart and get a feel for how they work together. This is a real key part of astrology when we're looking at birth charts and looking at how your future might look and examining the past. Once you get to grips with the sort of energetic signature of these aspects, you'll have so much more control over the way you practice astrology. And it will you'll start to read it like a language. It will be like, you'll be able to look at the chart and read it almost like you're reading a book. So this is an introduction to it. Now, I've already recorded the content, so I actually know it's not really just an introduction because I went on one of my sort of usual rambles midway. And I will also be honest, I did have a couple of distractions, kid and husband related distractions where we had so much noise in the background, I had to stop recording and then come back. So, I'm under quite a bit of pressure. And also because I've been left alone in the flat to be able to work in peace and quiet, I had the luxury of being able to explore what interests me, and it's patterns and numbers. And so, I went to town on this just a little bit too much. I have spoken about the great big stellium that I think was behind the whole COVID phenomenon that started in 2019. We could see it coming. Us astrologers could see it coming. And, the grand square of 2015, I've spoken a bit about that as well. So by the end of this, you will have an understanding of each of the aspects and the kinds of energies that they have. Are they easy? Are they friendly? Are they difficult? Are they really challenging? Where are they helping you and where aren't they helping you? And you'll also have an understanding of some of the larger patterns that can form, when you've got a square and a trine and a couple of trines together, bigger pictures form, like bigger sort of sacred geometry. So it's fascinating from an astrologer's perspective. Now, because I've already recorded this and I can see this is a heck of a long film, I would absolutely recommend that you have a pen and paper, get a really big drink and do this in chunks, okay? So absorb a little bit of a time, come back and enjoy it again. This might be too much, but I assure you, if you're fascinated about your own birth chart, this is really important to have a look at. And in particular, if you want to look at the charts of your best friend or your partner or your parents, your children, you're pretty much certain to see a stellium somewhere in the mix and a trine and a square, and you'll start noticing things. Trust me, it will get exciting. So with that in mind, enjoy this, take it at your own pace. You don't have to do it in one go, but just enjoy it. I hope you find it useful. So let's have a look at these angles now and get to see what they look like. So what we've got in front of us is just a circle, which could represent a birth chart, obviously. And you'll see that we've got different ranges of degrees around the outside. So this is 0 degrees. And when you've got two planets at 0 degrees, it's in an aspect called a conjunction. And we'll have a look at all of these examples in a minute. Now, we're not going to worry about these 45 degree ones. They're known as semi-squares. I'm not teaching you about these in this program, but I am sharing with you a little bit about the sextiles, because this is 60 degrees between planet A and planet B. So there's a 60 degree space, and you'll see this short blue line. So wherever you see a short blue line in these charts, that represents a 60 degree angle known as a sextile. And here's one to the other side. So if we imagine that this is planet A and all of these around the outside are planet B, a connecting planet. So the next one we might have a look at is the square. And that's a 90 degree angle, literally forming a square between planet A and planet B. Or you could have planet B on this side at a 90 degree angle. Then we've got what's known as a trine. This is the long blue line, and it represents an angular difference of 120 degrees. And again, this is the symbol for a trine. So you got a 120 degree angle there and one there between this planet and this planet. Now, I'm not going to tell you about the quincunx, which is also known as an inconjunct, but there is an angle that we look at that's 150 degrees. But the other main one I'm going to share information about today is the opposition, and that's where you've got planet A here and then planet B is exactly opposite. Now, in the examples that are going to follow, I'm going to be showing each of these aspects on the chart of Evelyn Thomas. Now, what you might notice is these aren't exact. So when we say an aspect is exact, it's because they are exactly 60 degrees apart or exactly 0 degrees apart, i.e. exactly in the same space. But with astrology, we allow an orb of difference. Now, that orb of difference might be up to 8 degrees. So, for instance, planets that are within an 8-degree space of each other are known as being in a conjunction. Now, you might have two planets that are in a conjunction together, and you might have a little S next to it or an A. If it's got an A next to it, it means it's getting tighter, i.e. the two planets are moving closer and closer and closer together. But on the day that they were born, they were this far apart. But if they were still on their paths getting closer. That might happen because one's going backwards, i.e. is going retrograde from our perspective, and the other's going forwards. So they might appear to, cross in the middle. But what you also find is that planets move at different relative speeds. So you have a slower one, and then you have the faster one catch up. And at some point, they make a connection. Now, in those connections that are coming into being, we call that applying. So it has an A next to it. On the ones where, say, there's two planets in a conjunction, but they're slowly moving apart. They've already been in an exact conjunction, and they're moving away from each other. We call that a separating aspect. So it has a little S next to it. The ones I pay more attention to are the ones that are exact. Or when I look at a birth chart, I will look at the most exact aspect that birth chart has, because that will carry a lot more weight than some of the others. I also pay more attention to the conjunction. I pay a lot of attention to a square because it has very strong energy, and also a lot of attention to an opposition because they're quite tricky to manage. And I pay a lot of attention to the trines. The one I pay a little less attention to, but it's definitely a nice to have, and it definitely catalyzes things, and that's the sextile here at 60 degrees difference. So, that is showing you a range of the main aspects that we're going to be covering today: the conjunction, the sextile, the square, the trine, and the opposition. So that's 5 aspects we're going to have a look at. Let's have a look. One last thing I would say is that these are all based on multiples. So, for instance, the sextiles and the trines are based around a numerical 3. If you imagine the chart is separated 3 times, you'll get all of those angles covered. So if you were to intersect a chart 3 times, you would get 6 equal sections. The squares and oppositions go on a 2 or a 4 kind of energy, and then later on, when you put in the semi-squares, it goes up to 8, and you can keep looking at those resonances. The 2s create polarity. So, that's why the oppositions are quite difficult, because they're creating this very strong polarity between the way that the planets express themselves. Whether, you might have one that's really positive, one that appears negative, but they're always pulling at each other. In reality, no planet is negative or positive. It's just the way they might interact with our charts. So, that's kind of interesting to know, right? So let's have a look at some of these aspects now. So the easiest way I think, to have a look at it is to just have a protractor. And I think if you are an astrologer, when you're starting out, it's worth having a protractor. So I like to have a pencil in my hand, because you can always, especially if you print off your charts rather than doing them on the computer, you can get a protractor out and then you can easily see the aspects. And I think it really gets you used to looking at the charts. We can get very lazy when we're looking at charts because it's all populated for us. So if I have a look, now the order I've done these in, by the way, I've done the softer ones, the easier aspects to manage first, and the more challenging ones after. So that's why I've gone in with a sextile. You'll notice that I've coloured it blue. You know, I've done the arrows in blue, and the same for the trine, and there's a reason for that, which you'll find out. But so you'll see that there's a 60-degree space between those two. So if we apply that to the chart of Evelyn Thomas, I've highlighted just one of her sextiles. She's got a few. Now, if you notice, a sextile has a short blue line. That's how you know it's a sextile, because it represents a 60-degree difference. Like I said, there is an orb of difference. Now, for a sextile, we try and keep it as tight as possible. So I think I normally allow only an orb of, say, 4, maximum 6 degrees. I would really consider the planets involved to see how important they might be. But because it's not a major aspect, we try and keep it as tight as possible. But the sextile is basically very useful. It is pleasing. It's helpful. It's almost like having a helper. You know, it kind of works with you. It catalyzes things. Where there's sextiles, there's additional energy. It's like it's an opportunity, but it's not one that is really gifted to you. It's one that you have to kind of work with. So it's almost like when you have a sextile between planets, you've got a chance to use some extra energy, but only if you make a bit of an effort yourself. So it's not handing something over to you. It involves a little bit of an investment yourself as well, but it's fortuitous. So when I see sextiles, I always think of them as kind of best friends, or someone giving you a friendly helping hand, out of the blue. They're really helpful. So what have we got here? Now, you might struggle to see this. I'm not sure, but we've got a sextile between Mercury down here, which is at 24 degrees in the sign of Scorpio. And then we've got Mars at 25 degrees in the sign of Virgo. Now, to interpret this aspect, what you would do is you would first of all interpret the meaning of Mars in the 12th house. See, there's a little 12 there, in the sign of Virgo. So Mars is about vitality and strength and determination. And it is also where we take a stand, where we draw a line in front of us. The 12th house is very much about our imagination and our place of disorganization. Those parts we don't like to look at, the parts that we kind of shove in the attic. It can also represent the Akashic records. It can also represent our intuition and how gifted we are with the things that other people don't see. It's often thought of as the house of our undoing. So as such, it rules mental health. So it's quite possible a person with Mars in the 12th house can have slightly judgmental views of themselves. They can be very hard on themselves. That's a tough one to recognize. Also, with having Virgo in the 12th house, Virgo's a warrior and is wanting to be very natural and very, very sacred. And so again, the Virgo energy is definitely related to kind of being tough on yourself. I think when you take a particular stand and say this is what's important and sacredness is important, anything that's not sacred by default looks bad. And we're all human beings. So when I see Virgo in the 12th house, I often think that person is probably quite hard on themselves. So we've got that going on. This person's also got a Virgo rising or ascendant. And so this is a very hardworking person. And with Mars so close to the ascendant, again, they're very, very hardworking, but often want to keep to the background, which is unusual because with a strong Mars on the ascendant, you would normally expect to hear about them and see them quite a lot. But just in the 12th house, it's like, I just kind of want to be behind the scenes a little bit. So we've got someone that's very hard on themselves, and takes a lot of responsibility, probably too much responsibility for what's going on in the world, and not so much about what they can actually change and what they can actually manage. So I would imagine this person could actually make themselves quite ill trying to do that. Also, the way that they might want to express themselves, it might be very difficult for this person to put up a physical barrier or an emotional barrier when they're dealing with people. So probably what they do is drift off and maintain a firm distance, but struggle to kind of react to people in real life. They could very well be reclusive. So it's an interesting thing to consider. So we've considered a little bit about Mars here, and then Mercury down the bottom here is about the way we communicate, and it's in the sign of Scorpio. Now, Scorpios are intense. They like to have very vigorous conversations, and they also like to go as deep as they can, and they're unafraid of embarrassing other people. Like a Mercury in Scorpio is quite strident and might sometimes say things just to trigger others. Mercury is also in the 3rd house. If this line wasn't here, you would see a 3. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way around. The 3rd house is about communication, and also about how we learn. So the sextile here, if we were to sort of blend those, and this is just one interpretation of those energies, is that this person is an active and deep learner, i.e. the Mercury in Scorpio. They learn through having very incisive conversations and through going into a subject very deep. And it's also quite possible that this person likes to mull things over for quite some time and figure out their responsibility. And where this is giving some advantage is that the person doing the thinking has a very deep mind. So the advantage is this person has access to a depth that a lot of people don't have. And so if you had another planet coming around the outside, i.e., in like 12 years on, when say it's about 10 years on. So Jupiter has made its way all the way around and it's almost back to where it was, but it's not. Jupiter's just around here and it's right over Mercury. In this year, you might find that the person who's doing the thinking, i.e. Evelyn Thomas, she uses her depth in such a way that rises her up and expands her profile, and expands her as a communicator, and possibly expands because if Jupiter was here, it would be in a conjunction with Mercury, but it would also be in a sextile, a transiting sextile to Mars. And so at the same time, when she's having this moment of uplift in the way that she communicates, she will be understanding things from a much deeper perspective in the unconscious mind. So that's just like one key interpretation of that energy. But if I was to factor it in with the trine that's going from Mars and Venus to the moon and other factors, then there's a much bigger, richer story emerging. So that's just one. So that's a look at a sextile. So like I said, sextiles, they're smaller aspects, they're not so important, but they're very helpful. They're like a good neighbour that helps you out and brings you a little bit. But you usually have to do something yourself. It's not a free ride. And the reason they're blue is all the blue aspects represent the things that are easier to work with, and the red ones are showing the bits that are a bit tricky. So let's have a look at our next one, which is a trine. So it's another blue one, and if you remember, the trine separates the triangle the circle into 3 triangles. So if we were to apply this to to the chart of Evelyn Thomas, what you'll notice actually, if we're looking at the triangles, there's a very long blue line here. That's a trine. There's another one here and another one there. And she's got another one and another one. In fact, let's count how many she's got. She's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 trines. Now, trines with the 120 degree energy, I always think of as being talent. So when I see a trine in somebody's chart, I think that they are talent. When I see multiple trines in their chart, I think, wow, this person's got lots of talent and an ability to kind of work with lots of different styles. This character, i.e. Evelyn Thomas, my mystery person that I made up, she's actually got what's known as a grand trine, where you actually have an equilateral triangle form out of the placement of her planets just because of the exact time and date and place of her birth. Now, one thing I do know about people with trines, because I've got quite a few and my husband's got loads, and from working with lots of, sorry about my creaky chair, I'm on a it sounds like I'm passing wind, but it's actually my rickety old chair. The thing with trines is the more you have, sometimes the lazier you can be. So when you see a chart that's laden with blue, it shows lots of opportunities to be utterly brilliant and to be able to do lots. But it doesn't necessarily show the determination and the energy required to be able to do something with the trine. So in this instance, I know that this planet here, or this character here, is actually Chiron. And then we've got the moon. Excuse me. Okay, so I had a little break there. Had to do a bit of mumming. I have 3 small children. And sometimes, working from home gets a little bit interesting. As I'm sure any of you who are listening who are in the same position know only too well. What can you do with a 2-year-old, a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old? Sometimes it goes a bit crazy. So anyway, they've gone out with their dad, so I'm free to talk to you about trines. So I did talk about how trines really confer to talent and also opportunity. So with these opportunities often come a real chance to make something of yourself. And when I see grand trines, I really think of somebody who's super talented and who has star quality, somebody who is a natural born star of some type, related to the field that they're in. So for instance, here, Evelyn has Mars and Venus. Also, she's got her moon connected in there with 2 trines. She's also got this up here is Chiron. Now, I haven't put any information about Chiron into this course, but I know I've done quite a few podcasts. And if you go to Spotify and go to Feel Good Astrology, you can listen into my Chiron descriptions through the houses. So that's a really good resource. But you've got the energies of these working together in a really talented way. So at some level, Evelyn has got an ability to kind of create healing or create a sense of release through her creative endeavors, represented by Venus, through the way she expresses herself in a sort of vitality way, from her standpoint. It feels like she's able to heal herself. And she's got a great way of working with her emotions in a way that frees her. So this gives her quite a lovely backdrop. She's very talented in healing. So any kind of healing work that she would do, she would be brilliant at. She's also very artistic. The trine between Venus and the moon is very much linked into musical ability, acting ability, painting and drawing and illustrative. She's somebody who creativity works for. If she's not actively using that, then she's just going to be a really pleasing person. She'll have a really great way of being with people, really empathic and awesome. And so with those sort of energies blending with Chiron, you've got somebody who can work with others, and make others kind of feel better about themselves. If Evelyn, or the person who owns this chart, if they were an actor, you might find them in roles and storylines that create a release, like somebody who does a particular genre, a sort of happy ever after genre, but really like a hero's journey, what she goes through and how she rises above it. So there is this sort of feeling that, whatever she's given, she adds something to it, and then she's able to produce something really beautiful from it. So this is quite a magical quality. This trine here between Pluto, to do with transformation, and the midheaven. So aspects aren't always just strictly between planets. They're also between planets and angles. So here, Pluto is in a trine with the angle associated with the career. Now, anytime an external planet goes over Pluto or moves over the midheaven, it's going to be activating this trine and energizing it. So with this Pluto and midheaven, or MC, as you might call it, the angle to do with your career and recognition, this is a useful aspect in creating longevity and transformation, and creating a permanent change. So Pluto is about things breaking down, and the transformation that comes from us yielding to a new situation. And so when something goes over Pluto, whether it's maybe the sun, a transiting sun, or who knows, every time the moon goes over Pluto, it's going to make Evelyn a lot more sensitive than usual, and a lot more wanting to be in control, and super aware of anything that's out of her control, and also possibly things that are like psychic, things that come from outside of our perception. So Pluto represents the underworld and things that we can see that not others do. So it could be that when an outer planet here, a beneficial one, particularly Jupiter or Venus, that the Pluto in Evelyn, her opportunity to sense something coming in that could help her career, that it gives her a hunch that she can use. And so I would say, in particular, when Jupiter goes over it, it's going to raise some interesting things here. Likewise, when something goes over the top of her, the area of her career and recognition and achievement, when it's a helpful and beneficial planet, it's going to create some kind of drama for her, because Pluto is related to dramas. But it should be a drama that she can resolve. It should be one that she'll have to yield to. It might have issues of power and domination. It could be a promotion. With each of these things, it will give Evelyn more to consider. So, there's a lot going on there. Let's have a look at our next aspect. So the next one we're going to have a look at is conjunction. Now, it's 0 degrees. I could have just put 1 arrow there, but I put 2 just to show that sometimes conjunctions can be like in a couple of degrees away from each other. They can be up to 8 degrees apart, according to which tradition you look at. So let's have a look at where she might have a conjunction in her chart. And she's got a few. So this one here, there's a 6 degree difference between Mars and Venus. Mars and the ascendant are exactly at 25 degrees. And so the ascendant and Venus are also in a conjunction. Then we've also got Neptune down here in a conjunction with the IC, which is the angle to do with the home. And then here, you can't actually see the symbols, but I've looked at this chart so much now. I know that this one here is Uranus and this one here is Jupiter, and they are literally just 3 degrees apart from each other. So when we have a conjunction, we have planet A and planet B fusing together. So like their hands come together, and whatever one is contributing, the other is also putting into the mix, and they kind of blend it together. So if you think about Jupiter and Uranus are quite good bedfellows, really. They've got a similar principle So Jupiter is about expansion and hope and optimism and things getting bigger quite quickly. Jupiter is also a bit about fame and celebrity. And Jupiter is also in the sign of Sagittarius here, and it rules Sagittarius. It's very happy in the sign of Sagittarius. Now, Uranus is about change, and it is about status change. It's not about having a sort of like big hierarchy. It's about keeping everything quite level. So like nobody's more important than the other. Uranus is very kind of humanitarian. It kind of levels the playing field quite a bit. It often throws things in the air, and then as things land, there is a new normal. So Uranus is interesting. Uranus is also futuristic, quite technical. It really represents the airwaves. In particular, Uranus is the planet I consider to be the ruler of the internet. Uranus is also the ruler of the sign of Aquarius. So there's a sort of an Aquarius and Sagittarius theme here. Aquarius is very much out of their own reality. Aquarians are often in the position of looking at society as a whole. They're very altruistic and often looking at the overall, purpose of things. Are things working correctly for everybody? It's a very sort of like charitable position. And Jupiter and Sagittarius is very much about moving away from normality and going somewhere kind of new and foreign and expanded. It's also about our beliefs and spirituality. So having these two planets mixed together in the third house, because you might see that there's a three here. So it's 1, 2, 3. We're in the third house. The third house is about our communication and how we learn. Evelyn has got a very strong learning style, and her learning style is best accentuated through freedom and difference and originality. She's highly creative, and when she gets an idea, she wants to expand on it in quite innovative ways, in futuristic ways. She's very inventive, so she would be a great person to have on a science team, like early in school and stuff. During her school career, she'd have had a very insightful way of using what she's learned. She's quite practical as well, so she wouldn't just want to learn theories for the sake of it. She'd want to apply it and be inventive and help others with something that she's come up with. She's also greatly philosophical and spiritual, and is likely to be very kind of out there and quite odd in her belief systems. So she's possibly a front liar. She's out there, kind of leading the way in a way that other people who are more conservative might find very difficult to cope with. But Uranus and Jupiter also share this kind of explosive energy shift, this sort of big energy shift. And those two planets together have cropped up numerous times in the charts of people who have big wins, like winning the lottery or getting a massive contract. They have these kind of Cinderella moments where everything just suddenly goes well. So there is something very kind of lucky and fortuitous. Now, is it that they're luckier people? I don't know. But one thing I do know is they have the habits and behaviours of somebody who's lucky. So they are expansive in their worldview, they are open-minded, and they want to give things a go. And also they have basically good feelings for people. They have good feelings for themselves. She's got very high levels of confidence shown there, and in her ability to articulate things. So she's very strong. Now, this is where conjunctions get really, really interesting. If you were to imagine that the planets, obviously this was set when she was born, but the planets keep on moving. When something big goes over here, then it activates this. So maybe when Jupiter comes back or Venus comes back, now Venus would just be for a day. So it would maybe influence her for a whole week as it's coming into aspect and then leaving, as it's applying and as it's separating. But when you've got Jupiter here, then this is the time of a magnificent idea. This is the birth of something really big. And this is also, she's also somebody that needs a lot of freedom. So in fact, I was just thinking whilst communicating, actually probably school wasn't that good for her. I would actually imagine that she's a lifelong learner. If her parents were wise enough to have a look at her astrology as a child, they may well have said or heard from the astrologer that actually she likes to learn on her own, and she likes to learn in her own way. She doesn't actually like to learn from conservative teachers. She's much more surprised and delighted by unconventional teachers. She's a kind of person that would benefit from not doing a degree, but actually instead of like paying all those thousands to, you know, stay in digs, pay for all the tuition of a degree, etc., and then the lifestyle that goes with it. Her parents, it would be so much better for her to pay for one-off lectures with real thought leaders around the world, and maybe, you know, do some kind of fundraiser, get a load of her pals who are open-minded, and they all put some money in, and they like buy an hour of time with some really good thought leaders and give them some questions that are going to help them. So she's somebody who is very forthright in her inspiration, and she needs inspiring teachers. And not to say that teachers at normal schools aren't, but she almost needs an unusual education. And whether she gets it or not doesn't really matter, because she'll find it. You know, wherever she goes, she'll be able to find it. So that's a conjunction anyway. It sort of enhances both of those aspects. Like without Jupiter there, if it was just Uranus in Sagittarius, I'd say, wow, she's wild and wants to be free and has... very strong and philosophical ideas on the nature of humanity. And then, like, if it was just Jupiter in Sagittarius, I might say that she is very good at accumulating and wanting to use her brain to grow bigger in stature. But, you know, Uranus makes her a lot more humanitarian and a lot more about the people. And Jupiter... makes her stick around more to try and build something. So it's an interesting combination, and it's enhanced. So when the two planets are together, they're really enhanced. So anyway, let's have a look at the next aspect. So we're going to have a look at a square, and you'll notice that I've done these lines in red, and you'll see why in a second, because a square shows up with one of these short red lines, and you can see there's a few squares going on here. I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. One of the reasons why a lot of these are showing up, by the way, is because the way I've got astro.com set up at the moment is to create aspects not just between the planets but also between other bodies. So anything that's showing up with the North Node isn't a planet, it's just a spot in our chart to do with our fate and our direction. I've also got this highlighted as well, which is known as the Vertex, and the Vertex is really good to have a look at. Again, it really shows our direction in life, but it shows it from what the universe is asking you to get in hold of. So often the position of where your vertex is describes what the universe wants you to do for a living, or, you know, how it wants you to be as a person. And Chiron isn't strictly a planet at all. Chiron is an asteroid stroke comet. So let's pick one of these squares. So you can see there's a 90 degree, when there's a 90 degree difference, both planets involved, if you were to put a line between them, you would get a short red line. So in this, I'm going to have a look at the square between Venus at 1 degree in the sign of Libra, going down to Neptune at 27 degrees in the sign of Capricorn. Now, because I know that Venus is the faster moving planet, I know that this is a separating aspect. Now, if Venus was at 25 degrees in the sign of Virgo, which is where Mars is, she would be coming into the 90 degree aspect. She would be 88 degrees apart from Neptune. And if she got to 27 degrees in the sign of Virgo, she would be in an exact square of 90 degrees. But she's already moved on another few degrees. So she's 4 degrees separating out of that square because she's already moved on, and Neptune really stays the same. So it's not quite as important, actually, as the very strong square between Mars and Neptune. But anyway, Venus is the higher harmonic of creativity, and she's in the first house. She's also in the sign of Libra. Sorry, I said higher harmonic. She's the harmonic of creativity and love and generosity and flow and beauty. In the first house, it usually represents somebody who's beautiful looking, like really lovely looking, who wears her clothes well, has a really nice way of being. People want to be with her because she's nice to hang out with, she feels nice. So it's interesting, she's also got Mars there, so that kind of detracts a little bit, but it will balance out. She'll still have lots of admirers for sure. But Venus in Libra is lovely. Then you've got Neptune, which is the higher harmonic of creativity and the higher harmonic of love. So it can represent unconditional love. Very few humans in this realm of being actually reach that potential, in my opinion, myself included, because it's almost superhuman. Unconditional love. Is unconditional love possible for humanity? I don't know if it is, because the whole purpose of being in a body is that we are in the condition of embodiment. We're not unconditional. Our bodies condition our responses to things. So I don't know that humans can be completely unconditional. So I don't think we can ever really attain that, the beauty represented by Neptune, the sort of creativity that comes when we let go of our conditions and when we allow love to kind of come through us and work through us. However, there are some very beautiful people that manage to do it. And, some of our most amazing musicians and channelers and dancers and artists, that sort of information comes down and through us with Neptune. Now, Neptune here is in the sign of Sagittarius. So her idea of higher love and creativity is very much set around the Sagittarius description of spirituality, of excitement, of it being a bit diverse and foreign. So her unconditional love is probably revealed in a spiritual way or a psycho-spiritual way. She may also be very fascinated by celebrity, because Sagittarius, one of its negative sides, I think, is that it's fascinated by celebrity, and it can be seen as being a bit crass and a little bit, what's the word? Shallow. Shallow is a really good word, actually, to describe one of the negative sides of the Sagittarian personality. So it doesn't seem to always have structure, or what's the word I'm thinking of? Can't think of it. You're probably thinking of it. But it doesn't matter. Substance. Sometimes Sagittarians, with their big ideas and their ideas of, being the best or being a celebrity, sometimes it seems to lack substance. So you have to watch that. And I know, because I've got a lot of Sagittarian in my chart, so I'm always aware of that. But Neptune in Sagittarius is, at its highest expression, is about finding the meaning of life and understanding spirituality in a magnificent and expanded way. And then with the square with Venus, is possibly one interpretation is that Evelyn gets really caught between being able to be man-made creative and being able to be creative as a actual human. And then she feels the dissatisfaction of feeling and knowing how it should really look. So it doesn't matter how hard she tries and how much she sings her heart out, or how beautiful the music is that she creates. It's never good enough, because she's always just creating as a mere mortal and not like an immortal. Like, to me, seeing that aspect in her chart makes me think that she has a yearning to merge with the infinite, and she knows it's possible. And she also knows that while she's here in this body, she's got to live the reality of the body. And that means not ever really matching up to the infinite potential that she may know she already has. So this is quite a difficult one. Now, in terms of relationships, given that Venus is the planet of love and often describes our partners, it's quite possible that she has these unrealistic ideas on what love might be like, and and falls in love with very human, flawed men or women, and then suffers and feels a victim to the fact that, you know, love should be a certain way and it's not. So there's this very sweet and kind of naive square between those two planets that really describes the heartache that she kind of lives through. So she could actually get depressed by it, you know. And if she's really lucky early on in life, she'll meet some very great coaches and people that have made their terms with the world, you know, great artists and musicians and philosophers and people that are creating something of value in the planet, who have made their terms with the earth, and they don't worry that what they provide is not good enough. They just get on and do it, you know. Or she might meet people who have just found themselves in a loving relationship, and they can see that actually a relationship, as flawed as it might be, could be the best vehicle of spirituality and the divine. So if she's around good people, this could be quite useful. You know, she can have some very good experiences from it. But if she doesn't get a good example set to her, she may end up going on this lifelong quest that she never really achieves. Now, her Neptune is also very close to the part, you know, the angle to do with the home. So it's possible that one of her parents, possibly her mum, given that they're two very sort of femininely expressed planets. But it's quite possible one of her parents is a sort of depressive, alcoholic-y type who never got over being human. You know, never really made their terms with the earth. Neptune is definitely sort of linked into drugs and drink, trying to escape. Escapism's really huge. Given all these different aspects, she really could be an actress or a musician or you know, somebody who entertains. And in that moment, she merges with the role and feels great. And then immediately after, almost feels used, you know, like, whoa, where's that energy gone? You know, so this is all very fascinating. And you can read this at so many different levels. And of course, all the planets keep on moving throughout life because that's what happens. We continually evolve. And so as she goes through her day-to-day, year on year, each of the planets has carried on moving. And it will be one moment, you know, Saturn might be over here, or Pluto might come down here, and it's going to irritate and trigger all of these things. So, yeah, this is a tough one for her to crack. Now, if her Venus and Neptune were in a trine together, that shows where her vision of unconditional creativity is realized through her earthly creativity. It's almost like she feels it and she can own it and channel it and make it her own and kind of bring it to land. So that's the kind of subtle difference. And then let's have a look at the opposition then. So the opposition is where one planet is here, planet A is here, planet B is there. They're going in different directions. It's like going for a walk. We've got two dogs and one's old, one's young. And if we can get the young one on a lead and we go walking, they're often going off in two different directions, a bit like going out with your kids. They all want to run off in different directions. And when that's happening, you as a person are getting pulled. You know, it's crazy. It's like, and you get split in two. So the opposition is difficult and it's very difficult to rectify. So let's have a look in her chart. So with the squares, you had a short red line. The long red line belongs to the opposition and it goes right the way through. And she's got a couple here. So this is Chiron, the wounded healer, and it is in opposition to Mercury. And it's also in opposition to Uranus and also Jupiter. The most exact one, I think, is to Uranus. And this would have been quite a difficult year for a lot of people because both Uranus and Chiron move, you know, approximately 7 years per sign. I mean, Chiron does actually have an elliptical orbit. So at certain points in his orbit, he'll spend many, many more years than 7 years. And at its shortest, a very short period of time. But on average, he spends about 7 years in each sign, as does Uranus. So the year that Evelyn was born, lots of people would have been, you know, they'd all have this in their makeup. And if their sun or their moon is aspecting one of these planets, it will be a big deal. Thankfully for her, this opposition, the sort of energy that comes from this opposition can be funneled through this trine and this trine. So often when I see difficult aspects, I will look at where the energy can go, how you can reconcile it, because you can't reconcile things that are going in two different directions because they are opposing. But you might be able to take some of that in. You might be able to use this aspect here to help. Who knows? But anyway, Chiron represents our feelings of hurt and upset, our childhood hurts and what we learnt from childhood and how it's affected us. It's like our Achilles heel. And then Uranus shows our need to be independent and to start over and to kind of create change. And so what we have here is somebody that can't deal with their hurts. And the only way they can do it is to shut down part of their life and move on. So it's not somebody, Evelyn, when she has hurts, just on this aspect, she's not able to process them. And so when that hurt comes, she has to cut down her life and she cuts away another part of herself. So that makes it very difficult to be wholesome and healed. When I look at somebody's chart, I look at their ability to stay wholesome, healed and perfect. And of course, if you're cutting away, chopping away at different parts of your life because you can't cope with that part of you, so you kind of chop it off, sweep it to the side, chuck that one off, sweep it to the side. If you're always doing that, you're gonna have lots of gaps inside you, and it's those gaps, I think, are the causes of dis-ease. I honestly, I'm not a doctor, obviously, as you know, but I think the emotional psychic trauma of not being at ease with yourself creates a dissonance in your energy, and where you get that dis-ease in yourself, it can manifest as an illness or a muscle spasm or something like that. Our bodies are listening to our thoughts and they work together. So yeah, this is very tricky. Now, at the start, when I was just looking at the trines, and I said, well, she's got this lovely trine energy of Chiron to the moon, so she'll be able to process her hurts, and she'll be able to process her hurts with physicality and with her emotions here as well. So I was saying, she'd be actually very good at that. And then when you consider this aspect, you see, well, she is good, but only in certain circumstances. And when there's a circumstance that has a very sharp and jarring change, that's a no-go area. So she's got different areas of her life that she can cope with healing in that trine that's sort of represented. But if somebody left in her early childhood, like a parental divorce, or a parent dying suddenly, something very extreme happening, represented by Uranus, it's all about extreme things and change and uncertainty, then her healing stops. And it'll only start again when she goes to that place of hurt and kind of sits with it and allows herself to feel it and allows herself to move it through her body, represented by Mars, and to share about it with Venus and allow it to start moving again. But I've seen these aspects quite a lot. In 1965, 64 to 67, like those 3 years, you had Chiron and Saturn together, and then you had Uranus and Pluto together. And Uranus and Pluto were in the sign of Virgo, and Chiron and Saturn were in the sign of Pisces. So there's a whole generation of people with this very hurt, I've got to chop part of my life off. There's a whole sort of generation of people who have like lots of disintegrated energy that needs to kind of come back in and integrate. So I would say, I can't remember when her birthday is now. I know I set it up. I think I set her up as being born in the 1980s. I think 1983 off the top of my head. So she is actually the generation of the people born in the 1960s, probably. Because often when we're looking at astrology, we'll see the original generation, and then you'll see a kind of iteration of that theme in the offspring. or the next sort of collective generation. So this is kind of fascinating. And so often, if she's got hurt parents who suddenly get divorced because they're born in that time when they've got that aspect, she'll learn that pattern from them as well. So it's interesting. That's why also when you're looking at your chart, it's really good to look broader, look at your parents' chart and their parents' charts, and start to feel the generational shift, because the generations and the sort of planetary generations that your parents are under influence the way they teach you and the way you grow. All charts are not equal. In fact, I'm going to do a little session on that and kind of demonstrate why. But yeah, it's fascinating anyway. I love patterns. So that's the kind of, let's summarize. I've looked at the conjunction, that's 0 degrees, where two planets are together. Then we've got the sextile of 60 degrees. That's helpful and beneficial. That's the short blue line. We've also got the trine with 120 degrees. That's talent, opportunity, chance, luck, good feeling. Then we've got the square, which is difficult. It's jarring. You can reconcile it. And often, when you've got this challenging energy between the two planets, you reconcile it because they're both connected to another planet. And so you look to that other planet and think, oh, they've got a connection there. That's how I would use it. And then you've got the opposition, which is very difficult to reconcile. And it's a lifetime's work, really. So let's have a look at some of these. So I found these lovely little designs on a different website, actually. And they were put in a blog piece about different patterns that you see in astrology. And so this pattern is called a stellium. So I just copied and pasted. So I can't remember which site it is, but I will give them a credit. I will actually put it in at the bottom where this came from. So this is known as a stellium, and a stellium is where you have 3 or more planets in a conjunction together. And the way I read a stellium, given that the planets are all going around this way, anti-clockwise, and this is just how I do it, I look at the first planet and then the second planet, then the third, then the fourth, and then the fifth. I look at the house that they're in and the sign that they're in, and that will give me a really good feel for it. Given that they're nearly always in the same sign and house, it will really give the birth chart a very strong flavour. And if I was to interpret this, I'm going to assume that this is in the 8th house in the sign of Scorpio. So it's about secrets and birth, life and death and transformation, and other people's money. So there's a real interest in deep subjects represented by Mercury. So this person really likes to talk deep, and they feel deep. That's the moon. Their emotions are deep, and their emotions are unrelenting. That's moon in Scorpio. They're kind of unforgiving. They do bear a grudge. And when they are upset through conversations with people, and that kind of resentment comes up, it also gets magnified by Jupiter. And if you're not careful, it becomes part of the personality represented by the sun. And then it goes into the sign of Venus, the planet of Venus, which is about love and connection and generosity. So this person with this very strong energy about Scorpio, the chances are they're great people, because people with stelliums are very passionate, really passionate and focused. However, this person, when they feel hurt and slighted from the conversations that they're having, and they have their emotional reaction, and that emotional reaction kind of gets pulled out of perspective by Jupiter, and then it kind of gets integrated and they assume that this must be their personality. They take that out into the world and they're communicating that within their friendships. So this is somebody who quite often, I would imagine, has very particular friendship groups and will be very, very loyal to them. But I don't think this person is going to have lots of different types of friends. They're going to keep their cards quite close to them so that they don't have to go through so much pain. Like, they're born at the time of the new moon and also with Jupiter in between. So this is somebody who really likes new starts in a really big way, in a very Scorpio way. So new starts and control and transformation. They really could be one of those like top platform speakers that you can't like answer back to. You know, they could be very, very proud and they have their ideas and they're very set in their ideas. But if you challenge them with a bit of back chat, that Mercury gets a bit uppity and they'll put you in your place. And so you can see how this works. Now, if this was connected to the angle to do with the career, then this is somebody who's prepared to work and focus really hard on their career. You know, their thinking, their emotions, their need to expand, their personality and their love is all connected. This is the kind of person that would date somebody that they're working with or marry the CEO. You know, this is somebody who's going to work their way up and also, you know, get personal with them. You know, so this basically the stellium absolutely zeroes in on a part of life and makes it so much bigger for that person. So that's an interesting pattern. I've got a couple of stelliums. So I've got, you know, a couple of ways I really express myself. Now, this is the grand trine, which I did mention before. You know, it's formed by 3 trines. The more exact it is, the more beneficial it is. This one between Saturn, Venus and Jupiter, I think is actually quite lucky. I've got one between Jupiter, Saturn and my ascendant. They're not really grand trines, you know, when they're involving the angles. I mean, the full grand trine, I think, is with the planets. But Jupiter and Saturn in a trine is very helpful. Jupiter's expansive. Saturn is kind of restrictive, but creates structure. So I think people who have an ability to see an overall picture and build towards it. I think it's really helpful. They have really big plans, but then unafraid to put the structure in place and they get it done. And this person is able to do all that whilst working really collaboratively with people. So this is somebody I would employ for sure. Definitely. Let's move on to the next pattern. Oh, this is a kite. And you'll see why it's called a kite, because it actually look like if you were looking up at the sky and you saw that would be the kite and this would be the kite tails. So you've got a grand trine and then you've got these helpful sextiles all lined up. So you've got the grand trine and then an extra planet. And so basically you have a sort of helpful extra planet that helps you get your project off the ground and get things going. Now, anyone that's got this chart are going to be very lucky because they've got a lot of stuff going on there. Very helpful. Now, this one's got a few different names. Some people call it a great trine. I've heard it called that. A seal of Solomon, the David star or the Star of David. It's basically 2 grand trines. So you've got one there and then one there. And the thing with them is that they, the more perfect they are, it means that they will fall in the signs. They'll either all be in negative signs or masculine signs or positive and feminine signs. So I don't think I've mentioned this before, but traditionally in astrology, earth signs and water signs are considered the feminine or possibly negative. They're the ones that are more receding, and the air and the fire are the ones that are more moving, and they're considered sort of yang. They're masculine. They're seen as masculine signs or positive signs. So with this pattern, usually you would have like a grand trine here, with all the water signs, and then a grand trine here with all the earth signs, and they would match up in like a perfect Star of David. Now, the trines, if you get a trine, one bit of the triangle's right at the end of one sign, and the next is like in the middle of this one, and the next one's sort of in the next. You can have them like between elements, so they're not always going to be a grand trine in earth. You might have one that is earth and air. And that's basically because we allow an orb of difference. So I think at the start of this, I said that we allow up to 8 degrees difference either side of planet A to planet B in a conjunction. And I would allow 8 degrees in a trine as well. And I would allow 8 degrees in a square and also in an opposition. And like I said, I think 4 to 6 degrees in a sextile. So, you know, if one of these planets is about 22 degrees in the sign of Capricorn, that could actually take the trine to being at 1 degree in the sign of, or literally 0 degrees in the sign of Gemini. So it could be Earth, air, and then back to Earth, or it could even be Earth. Yeah, it can like sort of not be a traditionally set one in the same element. And we'll come to squares in a minute, and I'll show you the thing that's difficult with the squares is they involve different elements, especially when you've got a grand square. Every single one of those will be in a different element. So anyway, a double trine, 2 sets of grand trines, is seen as extremely lucky because there's so much opportunity going around. And if you imagine that the planets are always transiting, you know, they're always moving. When one of these planets moves over one of these points, it's not only in a favourable conjunction to this planet, but it will also be in a sextile with this one, a trine with that one, an opposition with that one, a trine with that one, and a sextile with that one. So it is in aspect with all these different planets. So with these really cosmic layouts of people's charts, one transiting planet can cause a really big shift. Now, this is quite a positive shift. It's only got one opposition and it's got 2 trines and 2 sextiles. That's a pretty good time. So, you know, the opposition might be that you just need to lose something to be able to gain so much more. You know, it's a change. You might just get tired whilst making a huge step forwards. So it's an interesting pattern to look at. And then we've got the grand trine, the grand square. So this is a square here, then another one here, another one here, another one here. So the grand square has got 1, 2, 3, 4 squares and 2 sets of oppositions. That's tough. And, you know, they will be more or less in different elements. So, you know, here it could be Aquarius, Taurus, Leo, and Scorpio. This demonstration is right on the cusp between each of these lines, so it might not actually be like that, but you know, it looks like it. And usually with these squares, they all have the same quadruplicity. So if you remember in one of the earlier videos about the signs, I said that there are quadruplicities. There's the fixed, there's a mutable, and then there's the cardinal. The cardinal's the first. The cardinal signs are Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. They're the go-getters. Then you've got the fixed signs. They are really difficult with a grand square because the fixed signs are really stubborn. So, you know, there's this kind of immovable load of planets, all square, all jarring to each other, in opposition with each other. And also, by their very nature, the planets are expressed in a very stubborn way. The easiest ones to get through are the ones that are in the mutable signs because they're willing to change and try a different way forwards. So, yeah, difficult. I remember back in 2015, there was a series of grand trines that kept appearing and then reappearing slightly differently. The 4th planet just kept changing. So, for instance, I think it involved, and this is off the top of my head, so it definitely involved Pluto, definitely involved Mars and Jupiter, and then I think it had a guest appearance from the Sun and possibly Saturn. No, Uranus and then the Sun. And throughout the course of the year, these 4 and 5 planets made a series of grand squares in 2015, and they were in the cardinal signs, the signs of go-getting, wanting to start a new project, wanting to move forwards. And you have Pluto, transformation here, Mars, aggression and needing to move and take action. You have Jupiter, which when it's positive, it's expansive. When it's aspected difficultly between Pluto and Mars, then it inflames everything and makes things bigger. And then Saturn or Uranus in the mix, it was an unholy alliance. It really wasn't that good. It was kind of terrible, in fact. And then the last one that I just wanted to show you was this mystic rectangle. There are so many more formations, but these are the most common ones that I see. And so you've got a trine and a sextile, another trine and a sextile, and 2 oppositions. So then mystic rectangles, I think, are an opportunity to do something really good. So you've got a lot of determination represented by the squares, the oppositions. But the oppositions, you can work through them. So for instance, this is another symbol for Pluto. Here, if you've got Pluto and Jupiter in opposition, without anything helping them, it's very difficult because you've got this need to expand and this need to control, not working together. And so this person is a dynamic person that wants their own way, but doesn't know how to actually get it happening. Was here, they're both connected to Neptune and they're both connected to the moon. So if they were to follow the Neptune path, they could express their need to control and expand through creativity and music and subtlety. And here they can do it with their emotions. They could be powerful and kind of really let their emotions out. So it gives them an out. And the same here, like the moon and Neptune in opposition. The moon is our tenderness and our innocence and our fragility. Neptune is our need to merge, our need to feel safe, and often a difficult Neptune feels depressed, and same with the moon. So this is very, very depressive. This is somebody who is at odds with themselves emotionally and often feels depressed because they don't know how to release themselves. Whereas Jupiter is going to give this Neptune and moon a chance to vocalize what they're feeling. And Pluto here is going to give them some strength to not be a victim. So it works really well. So I think, there's just one more. The finger of Yod is a useful one, but I haven't actually mentioned inconjunct yet, but this has a sort of 150 degree alignment. Now, the finger of Yod or finger of fate is seen as a very useful pointer because it is a pointer. And it's pointing to one planet in particular. And what I notice is to resolve the chart or to understand the chart, if you've got a finger of Yod, you follow the planet that is leading or being pointed to, because there is some release in that planet. And these 2 base planets in the Yod are working together. So the Saturn here is helpful in creating structure, loving structure. And from that loving structure, the rest of the chart can be magnified and let go of through the function of Jupiter, through magnificence, becoming bigger and bolder than ever, so it's very grandiose. So it's a very sort of beneficial aspect. So let's just go back. So there's a lot of different patterns we've looked at. So I'm hoping that's given you a feel for the aspects and how they work together. Now, when I was mentioning trines, and I did say that they're very useful, if they're all immutable signs, oh no, they wouldn't be. Hang on, they would all be in the same element. Don't worry about that. So look out for that. Right, this is a bit that I wanted to come back to, because what I didn't say was at the end of 2019, in fact, way before then, I would say probably for the last 10 years or so, and in particular in the last 5 years, and then picking up speed, more and more astrologers had got online and gone, oh my goodness, massive thing coming up. And it started to materialize around 2019, towards the end of 2019. We had Pluto, where is it? Capricorn. We had Pluto here, and it had been here for a really long time. Saturn had been coming closer to Pluto, but Saturn takes 2.5 years to get through this. And so Saturn was getting closer to Pluto. Saturn and Pluto are not a nice combination together. And you also had Jupiter coming up the rear. Jupiter takes a year to go through this space. Saturn 2.5 years, and Pluto, I think, about 14. So a really, really slow moving aspect. And so you had, as we were coming into towards the end of 2019, Pluto and Saturn and Jupiter were all together in a stellium like this. And so if you remember, I said it focuses the energies. Now, it focuses the energies of the house and the star sign and the planets. It magnifies them. Now, with this one, this is quite a lucky one because Mercury's a fast-moving planet. It doesn't affect us for too long. It's personalised, so we understand it. The moon, fastest-moving one, and we internalise it. The sun is our personality. It changes each month. Venus, it changes every 4 to 5 weeks. It's sign, so it's fast acting. Jupiter, it moves the whole thing in a year. So none of these are that long lasting. You know, if anyone has any trauma with this aspect, it should be fairly short lived. But here we had Pluto, 14 years, Saturn that takes 2.5 years, and Jupiter a year, and all meeting in Capricorn. Now, the sign of Capricorn is about the state. It's about the government. It's about the controlling class. It's about the ruling elite. It's about money and the acquisition of money and the keeping of money. It's very much about power. Capricorn is also about old people. And it is also about tradition and status, massively about status. And the Capricorn energy is not one to boast, and it's definitely not one that wants a get-rich-quick scheme. It will plan its scheme for many, many years, and it might take a decade to hatch its scheme. It might take 20 years. It might take 100 years. It might take 1,000 years. But if there's a big long-term scheme coming up, then you get aware of it, you know, under the Capricorn energy, only right at the last minute. It's like revenge is best served cold kind of thing. Very kind of Scorpio Capricorn energy. And if you think about it, Saturn is ruled by Capricorn and Scorpio is ruled by Pluto. So you had the two planets, those two planets I just mentioned. So you had the idea of revenge, the Scorpio. Jupiter rules Sagittarius. Jupiter makes things bigger, and Saturn brings in the law and the enforcement and rules and regulations. And all three of those combined in the sign of Capricorn occurred at the start of the COVID phenomenon. So you had the symbol of death represented by Pluto. And Pluto is also about control and domination. So control, domination and death. And also Pluto rules fear and the underworld. So the fear was a really big stamp of this phenomenon. Jupiter took the message far and wide, much further than it ever could have conceived. You know, it had to go to MSM, like, mainstream media. Then we've also got social media. It had to affect every single person. So the Jupiter thing magnified it. And Saturn brings in the controls to allow the Pluto to happen. So from a government's perspective, if there is a real pandemic, how is the government going to manage it? Well, with that astrology, the only way you're going to manage it is and from that astrological perspective, is to lock everything down, imprison it, very much Saturn themes, inject it, very much a Scorpio, Pluto control theme. Scorpio rules the pharmaceuticals. So if you think you've got the governments, the pharmaceuticals and the banks all in bed together, and Jupiter to make everything bigger, the fear bigger, the pandemic bigger. And so I was looking ahead at this from like 10 years ago thinking, oh my God, I don't know what's going to be happening in 2020. This is going to be huge. I was thinking it could be a banking collapse, a huge banking collapse. And that could very well be a knock-on effect of it. I was imagining that life would change but it would be a forced change because of the Scorpio and the Capricorn. It didn't occur to me that it could be because of a pandemic. The military are both very Scorpio Capricorn things as well. So it did feel like it could be a military thing or a start of a war. And it's big. And in the next few years, like in fact, from December 2020, the 17th, Saturn went into the sign of Aquarius, and then Jupiter on the 19th went into the sign of Aquarius. That marked a sort of new change. Now, Aquarius is systems. It's in the light of COVID, it is nanotechnology, it is computers, interactive passports, differences, the rewriting of the rules of the Bill of Human Rights, the idea of legislation and what it takes to be independent and sovereign. Like Aquarius is very much about independence and freedom. And so it's interesting, isn't it, that since Christmas, I mean, before then it was being echoed, you can have your freedom, but you'll need to have nanochips or particles or all sorts of things put in you, computer chips, so there's all these different themes going on. So probably every astrologer out there that looks at the future has probably had sleepless nights thinking about that. That is a really good example of the worst kind of stellium that you could ever have. And from this perspective right now, it looks like the worst kind because it has had such a massive impact on us. And dare I say, and I'm nervous as I say it, but I'm going to say it anyway, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, we may come to look at it as being a lifesaver. One of the things with Pluto is it forces us to yield to something, and we get real to something. We realise where our life hasn't been real, and our reality changes, and then something else comes along. I suspect life as we know it has come to an end, and we're now in the realms of this sort of interim stage. Given that planets will soon be, like the generational planets are coming into Aquarius, Pluto will come into the sign of Aquarius in a couple of years' time. I actually think the age of Aquarius will be upon us. I think the age of Aquarius probably, I don't think you can actually say when it officially starts, because I think these epochs overlap, and it could have started in the 60s, it could have started at the beginning of 1901 or something. But when you look back from the fullness of time, you'll be able to see every single step that came in. But this is really a nexus point of the start of the age of Aquarius right now. But we'll still be in the start of it for another 100 years probably, if that makes sense. We need to look at perspective from a much more distant place, not from right in here, but from right out here. And as humans, we kind of don't have that capability. Everything is so personalized for us. We're always looking right here, where we are right now. But from a bigger perspective, I think we're going to notice that life changes. Now, I'm just wondering, is it going to change that we'll have our freedom at a cost? Or is it actually going to be that humans throw off the yoke of control altogether, and we learn how to control ourselves, and we all learned how to heal ourselves? This is the big thing. If we all knew how to heal ourselves in the first place, none of this would be an issue. And I think there are other ways of us healing ourselves, that the powers that control medicine and how it's taught and how it's shared and disseminated, and who control the resources of licensed drugs and who create the laws around it. I think it's a big club, and we're not in it. So but that's just my 2 penny worth. I'm hopeful that something really big and magnificent can come out of these times. I'm hoping for it. Maybe we'll see each other in the future, in this magnificent future. Who knows? So I did want to pass that on. Now, I recognise that this video was just about the aspects. I've gone in a lot deeper than I was expecting to. So please forgive me that I've gone in much deeper. So it has been a bit of a big old explore there, hasn't it? So let's just take us back to the original pictures. So all we're doing is literally just looking at the geometric patterns. That's all we do with astrology. That's all we are. We're like interpreters of patterns. Wowzers, we got to the end of this. My goodness, what have I put you through? Well, by now, you should have a really good feel for astrology and the aspects. And of course, I've included a little bit in the book, in the ebook and the workbook, so you can start to piece together the meanings of your own aspects. So, you know, the way I would do it, just one last recap, I promise, just one last. Look at the planet and the sign and the house it's in and do a little translation of it. Then look at planet B that's in relationship to it and say, which sign are you in? Which house are you in? And then add in the aspect. So you might say, you got moon in Pisces that makes you really emotional. It's in the 5th house. You're an emotional, creative person that loves children and quite playful with it. And you're in a trine with Saturn in Cancer. This allows you to play with children in such a beautiful way, whilst also creating a safe environment. So, you know, you're linking the two together. So you've got two different things and you're creating a link between them. And the link is the aspect. So anyway, hope that was helpful. If you want to share or like or subscribe, then please do. I really, really appreciate it. But anyway, stay cool. See you in the next one. Bye for now.